Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone to our second special meeting of council to discuss and continue the discussion on budget. So just a note on the agenda and again on the objectives and the process. So as I mentioned last week, so we're not sitting in committee, we're sitting as council, so we can pass resolutions if we need to. This evening, we're going to follow up on the grant application, since there were a few questions that came out of our last discussion. So we'll start with that, try to seek as much clarification as possible and see if there is consensus. The main focus then will be the capital budget. So there'll be a presentation from Director Boylan and opportunity for questions. Then we can open it up also to follow up, additional follow-ups on the operational budget, and then we'll see where we're at. If we feel we have all the information we need and staff feel they have all the direction that they need, we may or may not need Thursday's meeting. We bookmarked it, we scheduled it just in case. But depending how the discussions go this evening, we may not need it. We'll decide that at the end, because we could go straight into next Tuesday, where we receive and review a revised draft after all the different, pluses and minuses that we will have discussed last week and this evening. So that's the plan. Does that work with everybody? Is that clear? Good. Okay, so we'll begin the agenda disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. Proceeding with the minutes from March 1st. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none. Resolution?
That the minutes of the special meeting of the council held on March 1st, 2023 be adopted as printed and circulated.
Mover and seconder, Serna, Leach, all in favor? Carried. So we can proceed with reports and follow-ups from department, and we want to start with the grants, follow up on grants. Is that all right?
Through you, your worship, we are going to start with a asset management orientation by our asset management analyst, Talia Jones, who's with us tonight.
Great idea. Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
So good evening, your worship, members of council. This evening, I'll be providing you with a brief introduction to asset management and how asset management is being conducted for the Township of Malahide. Asset management is about making the best possible decisions during all stages of asset ownership. The objective is to operate and maintain assets that are necessary to provide specific levels of service for a community. This approach places importance on data management, service delivery, reducing community risks, maximizing community benefits, sustainable financial planning, collaboration, and communication. If you look at the bigger picture, asset management can be used to help communicate the how, what, and whys of municipal operations. Starting at the top of the pyramid, we can answer, why does a municipality provide a service? Services are guided by corporate and council strategic master plans and policies. And these service levels may be based on community expectations, economic development, or mandated through regulations. At the program level, plans are developed for each service, identifying performance measures, required resources, including assets, and the plans for ensuring service continuity and long-term sustainability. Then at the base of the pyramid is the operational level. This is how the services are delivered. This level contains the operations and maintenance plans for assets and is where the asset data is collected. Reporting regarding assets is conveyed upward from the operational level to the program and strategic planning levels so that decisions can be made regarding services and the allocation of resources. Asset management for Ontario municipalities is regulated by OREG 588-17, Asset Management Planning for Municipal Infrastructure. 588-17 requires an asset management policy as well as a plan for municipal assets. Both the policy and plan for the township are posted on our website. Last summer, the asset management plan was updated and presented to council for core assets only. These are the roads, bridges, and structural culverts, water and wastewater assets. Our next step towards compliance is to complete the plan for all assets by next summer. This will include fleet, facilities, parks and open spaces, streetlights and sidewalks, and guide rails. An asset management plan must include 4 components: an inventory of assets, an outline of the levels of service to be provided, the life cycle activities required for assets, and a funding strategy. In this example of a residential home, your service objective may be to ensure your home is safe. So the first step is taking an inventory of your home, its age, condition, and value. Next, you would identify the factors that contribute to meeting your service objective. You might want to keep your home in a certain condition. I believe it says fair condition or better, or ensure that it complies with current codes and regulations. These are your performance measures. Then you would examine the expected life cycle activities that would need to be completed to meet your performance measure goals. What is the approximate schedule for these activities, and what might be their projected future costs? Activities could be refurbishments, upgrades, or replacements. Now that you have a schedule of costs, you can make a plan for funding these activities, which may include a variety of sources. Knowing which expenses you have on the horizon also lets you take advantage of time-sensitive sales and rebates or changes in the market. The final most important step in this planning process is the commitment to reviewing the plan periodically to ensure you have the most up-to-date information when making decisions about your home. So this asset management planning process has been conducted for the core asset classes. The levels of service the municipality is aiming to provide for core assets can be summarized as providing safe and reliable services throughout the community. This service objective has been separated into 3 categories: safety, reliability, and inclusivity. For each category, there are certain performance measures currently being tracked. These metrics have been established through OREG 588-17 and through consultation with Asset Management Ontario. For the safety category in each asset class, the average condition levels of assets are tracked and measured against condition goals that ensure asset safety. For the reliability category, closures, restrictions, and service interruptions are tracked. And for the inclusivity category, the percentage of lane kilometers per kilometer of land, the percentage of service right-of-way crossings, and the percentage of properties connected to services are being tracked. It can be noted that there were no critical changes observed from 2021 to 2022, and that the core asset classes were in compliance with relevant regulations. So the asset management plan provides a comprehensive view of asset performance and cost with the goal of continuing to provide current levels of services to the community. The funding strategy within the asset management plan offers a long-term analysis of funding sources for asset lifecycle costs. The funding strategy informs the budgetary decision process, supporting but not replacing budgetary decisions. With the priority for limited resources being placed on legislated services, there may be trade-offs between competing performance-driven services that require strategic consideration. So I'd like to leave you with a few takeaways for asset management. That it is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It is not a one-time deal. It's a continuous improvement process, and it should become part of the organizational culture, placing importance on community communication and sustainability. So our next step will be to update the asset management plan for all asset classes and to make this available for council review later this year. And if you have any asset management related questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you for that. Great refresher and continued orientation on a great program, complex, but very, very useful, I think, for budgeting purposes. Questions or comments? Councilor Wilson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, when I was reviewing the costs of replacements of some of the assets 10 years out, it's just about enough to make you choke. And we'd better have a good plan, because letting things fall behind is just going to be so much more costly in the future. So it's yeah, it's just going to continue to get more challenging, and any of the great advice we can get from our staff is much appreciated.
Director Boylan or Sweetland, did you want to add anything to that to reassure us?
Sure, yeah.
As much as you can.
I think it's well known that you can't just continuously defer necessary infrastructure projects. Over the long term. It ends up costing the taxpayers more than just doing projects when they should be done. And that's what we've seen with roads, where the classical approach was run out to the worst road in the municipality and replace it. But what we're finding through programs like our asset management planning is that you want to make sure that you're doing those lower cost road rehabilitations in time, not letting them fall into such a state of disrepair that you have to replace it sooner. So these are the kinds of things we're looking at. We're looking at more data decision making for infrastructure. We're also talking performance metrics for infrastructure. And I think that's really relevant with council going into their strategic planning. It's something that could really serve as a measuring stick for community outcomes that council decides that they want to pursue through the strat plan.
Director Sweetland?
Yes, and through your worship, I can add as well. When it comes to the grant process, a number of the grants that do come out require that those projects are identified in our asset management plan. So having the 10-year outlook and those items identified definitely helps when it comes to grants. And the ongoing reviews that we do of our infrastructure, like we're reviewing the capital budget tonight, and everyone's seen that there's some expensive projects in the future. So the ongoing reviews, the OSIM inspections, and the road needs studies identify those are moving targets, where a structure that's planned for replacement in a specific year, it might come up sooner, it might be able to be deferred down the road as we continue to plan for it with these updated maintenance reviews.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is the word management as opposed to reaction to, I think that's where the culture shift is taking that long view and managing the assets, managing our savings, so it's not ad hoc reactive. So I think it looks like we're well on our way, and it allows us to manage reserves and save appropriately and in a very transparent way as well. Any other comments? If not, thank you for that. Again, orientation and refresher on asset management planning is a key component of our work. Do you need to receive the presentation? No? Okay. So if you wish, we can proceed. Director Boylan, can we talk about, go back to the grants and some of the clarifications? It was a follow-up required from the Aylmer Fair. We also had a question to staff about the fees for the facilities and why it looked like the request was higher even though our fees remain the same. So I'll turn it over to you for follow-up clarification.
Okay, thank you. So completely optional. I thought it might be helpful if we went over what I believe the consensus approvals were at the last meeting, because I know there's a lot of discussion back and forth. So it might be helpful to just run back through what I think the consensuses were. This is my list here. So we've got Springfield Santa Claus Parade requested $1,500. We're granting $1,500. Springfield Family Fun Day requested $550. We've approved $550. Malahide Community Policing Committee requested $2,000, but we approved $1,500. Knights of Columbus requested $1,350. We approved $1,350. Elgin County Plowmen's Association requested $500. We approved $500. Kinsman Club of Elmer requested $1,000. We approved $1,000. Elgin County Farm Safety requested $1,225. We approved $1,225. Elmer Malahide Museum requested $20,000 and we approved $10,000. Springfield Cemetery Board requested 5,000, we approved 5,000. Elmer Cemetery Board requested 18,000, we approved 18,000, and Luton Cemetery Board requested $2,500 and we approved $2,500. I guess I would stop there. If there's any incorrect information, we can deal with it at this time before moving on to the other items.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify, I think the Malahide Community Policing Committee, I had recommended that we deny the amount this year because they were in rebuilding. And there aren't, as far as I know, the committee doesn't have a lot of activities planned for this year, and there is some money available. So since we do have other requests this year from other organization, I think it would be okay to skip 1 year.
Okay, thank you. I think I misunderstood that to mean we're going to approve the prior amounts
Right,
funding.
sorry.
But that's why we're doing this. That's
Yeah,
helpful.
exactly. Thank you.
Okay, so from there, we reviewed the one-time $150,000 request from the Elmer Malahide Museum for facility renovations, and that was declined. And then lastly, we have our outstanding applications. So the first one was for the Elmer Fair Board. Previously, they had received $1,000 in funding. They're requesting 5,000. I believe there was a request to have them come to council to pitch what the request is for. In lieu of that, I believe we have a letter that was circulated to council. I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to read that, but maybe we could deal with that item first and then move on to the other ones.
Sure. Yes, please. Let's read it so that everybody, or anyone watching or attending can know what we're talking about. Go ahead.
So a letter from the Elmer and East Elgin Agricultural Society, in lieu of attending, dear members of council, we are requesting the grant in the amount of $5,000 this year to help promote Elgin County's largest truck and tractor pull, and also help us celebrate our 175th anniversary fair. The theme for the fair this year is celebrating rural life in the past. The funds will be used for carriage rides, agricultural exhibits and displays, education, and entertainment for the children. We have found that prices have increased 10% across the board, and we don't want to pass this along to our patrons. We are also requesting the week of June 26th for the road grader to level the track in preparation for our annual truck and tractor pull. Thank you and for your consideration, Randy Lohr, who is the president of the Fair Board.
Councillor Cerna.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Do they not actually want something there to, while the tractor pull is going on, to keep leveling the track out? Like, that's not mentioned in the letter. But I always thought that we supplied something then.
Yeah. There's a request for the grader to prepare the grounds, but it's not during the day. During the day, it's I believe it's looked after. So the request is only the week before. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So I guess the initial ask was for the fair. The letter now includes also the tractor pull. So I don't know if that changes anything in your consideration. What are your thoughts? So the fair, so the board, I guess, and the organization is organizing two main events. Councillor Leach.
Madam Mayor, through to the Director Sweetland, what is the cost of the time for the road grader for the time it would take to level that?
Through your worship, I would have to check. We've typically provided this service in past years. I'd have to check past years invoicing, how that goes. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but it's not a full day activity or anything like that. It'd be a labor materials for it'd be time and materials done for a few hours.
And I wasn't sure how, like, what's the going rate for road grader work?
Right. So there's a OPSS rates that are specific to each machine that we have, and labor rates that we would be using those rates that we tender out at. And again, I don't have those off the top of my head. It's a long list of
Thank you.
areas.
But yeah, it's a fair question in terms of it would be an in-kind contribution, but it still has a value to it that should be considered in the overall approval. Deputy Mayor Widner, did I see your hand or did I? No, okay.
Yeah.
No? Any other? Counselor Glinski.
Mayor Shigir, I thought that the use of the grader and somebody to run it was in kind and that there wasn't any charge for it. Now, was I wrong or?
It is an in-kind contribution, but it has a dollar value, but there's no, I don't believe there's an exchange of money. But it is a donation, right? Because while our staff is doing that, they're not doing something else, right? Counselor Cerna.
This $5,000 that they want, is that for just the tractor truck pull? Or is that for the tractor truck pull plus the fare?
It now sounds like it's both. If I read and understand the letter correctly. I think the tractor pull is a bit new information, maybe from what we had received initially, but I think it's an overall request by the organization for 2 events. So how do you wish to proceed with this request? So what's on the table is a 5,000 request, and we have not decided one way or another for this year. Deputy Mayor Widner.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just going to throw something out so we can discuss it, but I look at the previous funding and it's $1,000, is it? We do give the in-kind. I know that could be $1,000 the in-kind. Do we have trucks with that too? For trucking fill or? No, okay. But anyway, it doesn't take long to get $1,000 with heavy equipment. I'd throw out 3,000 in the total, but I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say.
Counselor Lewis.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, just from the past, from the history of the fair, it's a local event that a lot of rural people attend. It's not really a town fair. It's, Malahide is sort of the rural roots that make up that fair. Yeah, I can't say anything but to support it just for the simple reason of it's one of the biggest events that goes on in our municipality. And to be part of it would definitely contribute and benefit the patrons, I believe, of Malahide Township. So I'd have to support it. Yes.
Any other comments? Counselor Cerna.
I'm gonna have to agree with Counselor Lewis. Last year I took my grandkids to the fair. And even it's not Canada's Wonderland or the Western Fair, but they had the time of their lives. They loved it. They spent the day there. Brought my daughter and son-in-law in from where they live by Salford. And they spent money in Elmer, the community. So I think you got to spend a little money to make a little money. And the more we can promote this, I think, and make sure that it flies, I think the better off we'll be. So I'm in full support.
Any other comments and sort of sensing support for the full ask of 5,000? Perhaps in consideration of having 2 events on completely different occasions. So good, for the community, as Councillor Cerna just pointed out. And I think a further reminder, I think we talked about that last week in terms, I think this program could use a bit of a reset and refresh so that our decision-making process is a little bit clearer, and not just for us, but for the applicants as well. Like what is our philosophy? What do we support? To what extent and why? So I'll put that and bookmark that as part of our plan for next year. Anything else? Any other comments on the 5,000. Counselor Wilson?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't disagree with Counselor Lewis or Cerna. I'm a little concerned with jumping from 1 to 5. How about we split the difference between Deputy Mayor Widner and the other and make it 4? If that's okay with everyone else, I think it's a hell of a jump and it will keep most people happy without going full. It's a big jump. And it's we'll split it. How's that?
Now I feel like I'm at an auction. We got 4,000 going once. So, yeah, and I think this further speaks to this feel a little bit arbitrary, and I understand that we don't have all the tools to make a more information-driven decision. But we could, similar to our rationale for the museum, where we could signal, we recognize they have increase in cost. We recognize it's two significant events for the community. But we're not necessarily in a position to give everything to everybody that is being asked. Have to be responsible that way as well. Deputy Mayor Widner?
They are applying to the county through the county grant for 10,000, so we have to be careful we don't give money twice for the same event, but I don't disagree with the 4 before, but probably not everybody knows that, but it's $10,000 towards the county too, so you're gonna be paying it twice. Thank you.
Which they do every year also. Yeah. Counselor Cerna?
Okay, there's a difference between an ask and a get. Did they get the 10,000 grant? It's not done yet. Have they got the 10 grand before?
No.
So they haven't got it. What normally does the county give them?
It's, it tends to, and this is all public documents. If you look at the minutes from the Rural Initiatives Committee, typically the ask is greater than the total budget. So let's say $75,000 is set aside. They use a scoring process, and then depending on, they use a formula. So the higher the score, the closer to your total ask you get. So in general, the county in the past few years, if I recall correctly, nobody got the full amount they asked. Everybody got a proportion of what they asked based on the scoring matrix and how well they scored on their application. So I think perhaps last year they got around 6,500 or 7,000 out of the 10 because of the formula calculation. But this council has never considered, and I don't believe in our application process, whether we ask if grants are being stacked or not, and that we don't have, I don't think we have a policy around that or not. So.
I just wanted to point out that to ask for something is a whole lot different than what you finally get. So if they're asking for 10 and they get 6, they're still 4 short. At least with this, they ask for 5, they get 5. If they ask, or something, they know what they're getting. And I don't know when the county does their budgeting, but or it's been done already. Has it been done already?
I think it's being finalized, and I think the committee will probably do their scores very shortly, because they recognize, like, usually around this time, all the organizations are notified very shortly.
Okay.
Councillor Lewis, and I'll come back to Deputy Mayor Widner.
In the past, through you, Madam Mayor, it was the county granted a 5-day fair to Elmer Fair Board, and it was $1,500 a day. It was $7,500. They've granted every year as long as I was around there. Yeah.
No, there's history, and it has changed over the years for sure. Deputy Mayor Widner?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just as an aside to that, I believe the county's got $78,000 that they have to divvy up. There's probably 10 or 11 groups, and we have to go through each one and score them. And then it's a really strange. It is. Yeah. Anyway, you have to score them. Huh?
We're learning a lot, are we?
Well, it's just strange how they do it, but that's fine. It's the way it works. So, you know, they may or may not get that money because there's a lot of groups. A lot of them don't ask for either. There's a lot of 500s and there's some 250s. So
And like I said, I want to be careful that we've never considered that in the past, like other contributions. We don't know, I'm not aware if they apply to other things and whether we have a policy that considers all their sources of funding, or if we just take it at face value. So 4 was the last number that I heard as a compromise. And again, bit arbitrary, but a gesture. We recognize their increasing costs. Are we okay to move forward then to just clarifying the other items? Yeah. Okay. Allison, do you want to speak to the fees?
Yeah, so through your worship, after further examination and inquiry into the grant applications received, the 4 community organizations who made the request for grants at the MCP in South Dorchester Community Hall have increased their event bookings for 2023 versus 2022. It should be noted that if circumstances change and the event isn't held, the funding isn't provided. Funding is only provided when a booking is made.
So now we have the explanation. The fee is the same, but there are more events. So of course the ask is greater. Thank you for clarifying that for us. So is everybody in favor of the requests, approving the requests in full? So we have the Family Fun Day at $1,350. South Dorchester Optimist at 4,000, and then 2,500 for Swans and 1,600 for Springfield Brewers. Any comments or questions on those? Thumbs up. Okay, so that would conclude our discussions on the grants. Is that sufficient direction, Director Boylan?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Yes, I think that will modify. We have a minus for community policing. We have a plus, a bit of a minus for the fair. So that's what we'll look at next week when Director Boylan has a chance to do all the pluses and minuses.
It wouldn't take me long, but I can't do it, the presentation
Well,
going, so
Right.
I
'cause
could even do
you're
it tonight.
Presenting the next report, right?
if there's time, we could do like a quick reset.
Sure.
I could do a calculation if that's what council wants.
Sure. And in fact, yeah, we'll probably do a recess, maybe after the capital budget presentation. So if everybody's okay, we'll move on to capital budget. Director Boylan?
Okay. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. On behalf of administration, I'm pleased to present the 2023 draft capital budget for your consideration. For tonight's meeting, our focus is first on the 2023 draft capital budget. After my presentation, we'll encourage council to only deliberate capital related items first. And then if time permits, then we can go into like an open discussion period for council to ask any questions, whether they be operating or capital. Our last 2 meetings are currently placeholders. Oh, sorry. Our last 2 meetings are currently placeholders for final budget review based on the current draft budget plus any amendments that are made by council tonight. So our capital budget is, it has 3 main funding sources. It has property taxes from Malahide residents, the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund grant from the province of Ontario, and the Canada Community Benefit Fund grant from the Government of Canada. Though funding generated from these sources are stored in reserves until they're used, council is able to withdraw these funds through budget approvals or occasionally through resolutions during a budget year. A common misconception is that the financial impact of the capital budget is based on the blue circle or the magnitude of the capital budget, but it's actually dependent on the amount of property taxes contributed to our capital reserve, which is represented by the green arrow to the left. It's here where council sets the levy impact. The magnitude of the capital budget can change drastically from year to year. So to avoid swings in the tax rate, we smooth the impact on residents through the use of these reserves. When budget approvals exceed the amount of property taxes and grants that fund the township's set of capital reserves, balances in those reserves are drawn upon to make up the difference. Our long-term capital financial planning simply compares the amount of annual funding available against the magnitude of future capital budgets to determine what will happen to the township's reserves. And we've seen that in the budget book with an infamous red line graph. So when there's lack of parity between capital funding and capital spending over the long term, the township is considered to be financially unsustainable.
Director Boylan, I'll just interrupt 1 second for anyone watching or members of council. This presentation is not in the package. So if you're scrolling through the package, right? So it's the same information, but in a summarized in a presentation format. So just wanted to clarify that.
That's
Carry on.
correct. Yeah. So this is essentially the same information, but with our actual budget figures. So in 2023, our three main funding sources amount to $3,803,424. This is inclusive of roughly a 3% increase to the township's property tax contributions to its capital reserve, equating to a $70,000 increase this year, which you may recall from the budget summary presentation at last budget meeting. Based on this set funding amount, which I refer to the budget book as our funding equilibrium, when the township's capital budget exceeds this figure, our reserves will decline. As the budget is designed to accommodate single year draws and reserves in order to assess the adequacy of our funding, we must compare it to a long-term capital spending forecast. So to that end, we have prepared a 10-year capital forecast for this year's budget. The total spend over this period is nearly $37.2 million. The township road network accounts for the majority of the capital spending. Direct road capital projects account for 50%, while fleet, which is mainly used to service roads, is at 17%. Fire services account for 10%, bridges and culverts for 8%, and East Elgin Community Complex currently stands at 5%. And all other categories combined for 10%. So staff created this prospective project set using past council resolutions, the roads needs study, the road safety audit, our biannual bridge and culverts inspections report, the 2019 fleet replacement plan, our Parks and Rec master plan, the EECC capital budget forecast, as well as our asset management plan. For the 2023 budget deliberation, council is not being asked to approve the entire 10-year plan. Only the 2023 project set. So council's upcoming strategic planning sessions will reflect what our actual 10-year plan will look like. This is merely just a starting point for future budget development and financial planning. We will, however, encourage council to ask any questions you may have about future year projects. This is certainly considered fair game for these budget discussions. This graphic represents the 10-year capital forecast against our current funding availability. So the black line represents our 10-year capital project set. The average capital spend over this period is, the average annual capital spend is $3.72 million. The red line is our current funding level, which is $3.08 million, which that doesn't include the 2023 recommended increase of $70,000. So each year where the black line is higher than the red line, it represents a drawdown to our reserves. This will result in a series of significant draws over the next 10 years if we don't intervene through the budget. So the full 10-year plan is detailed in the budget book, but I'm going to highlight a couple of our more difficult years for council's consideration. So right off the bat in 2023 and 2024, we're spending more than we're actually bringing in, although $399,800 actually relates to 2022 carry forward projects for 2023. So it's not quite as bad as it looks for the 2023 drawdown.
Director Borland, we have a question. Councilor
Yes.
Glinski?
You brought this up before we had our budget deliberations last time around. And I just don't remember exactly what was said at that time, but looking at the chart on the old page 87, and Councillor Wilson also mentioned, it's on. Council Wilson also made note of it. My question is, in 24, there appears to be a $3 million drawdown. What drives that drawdown, that amount?
So I was just about to go into it. So I'm going to highlight 2025 is a very difficult capital budget year. I was going to go into that, and I was going to go into 2027. So those are our big budget spikes. I'm going to highlight a couple projects for council's consideration, and the plan's fully detailed in the budget book as well. So you can look at the full project list for 2025 and 2027. So I'll just continue. So as I mentioned, our first difficult budget year is 2025. Our average annual capital roadworks is 1.8 million over the 10-year period. But in 2027, we've got 2.7 million of roads on the books for that year. So right off the bat, it's an abnormally heavy year for roads. Beyond that, our biggest financial challenge in the entire 10-year plan is the Vienna Culvert Rehabilitation Project. And some councilors have talked to me about this one, but it's slated in 2025 for 2.2 million. So wherever this project is slated, the township will have a down spike in its reserves. You just can't fit it in any budget year without a down spike. We'll talk about options for that. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a bit, but debt is an option for that. If you had aggressive plans in the short term, like doing gravel road conversions, for example, you may want room in your reserves to pursue your gravel road conversions and not have to spend it all on the Vienna Culvert project. So that's something that we can talk about as a group, but more so once we've done our strategic plan and we have a better idea what the 10-year capital plan looks like. 2027 is another problematic year, but much less so. We have a pumper replacement for 725,000, the fire radio infrastructure replacement for 150. So that was a report that came last year for council. Over $600,000 in fleet replacements, and a heavy EECC year, which includes a $800,000 project for the parking lot and $200,000 for the desiccant unit replacement, both of which are shared 50%. So those are our most difficult budget years, but in general, our current funding level is well exceeded, even in lower cost years. So we discussed this a bit at Wednesday's budget meeting, but this trend would result in the depletion of the township's reserves, and we had a graphic to represent that. And this is what it looked like. So without intervention, our combined capital reserves would decline by nearly $6 million over the course of the 10-year forecasts. By the end of the 10 years, we'd still be in a financially unsustainable position. So the council of that time would have to choose to make some aggressive property tax increases, or take on a lot of debt, or defer capital projects, which, as we've discussed, can also have negative financial consequences for the township. So we would certainly be leaving the township in a worse place than it is today, if we pursued this plan. So it's not a plan that's endorsed by staff. It is being presented as evidence that the township must take a long-term commitment to improving its capital funding through responsible property tax increases based on the current project set. I don't know if we wanted to stop at that one. Hopefully that was the question, right? Okay. Okay, so to set us on a different path, what we're doing is recommending 3% annual increases to the township's reserve contributions to its capital reserve, plus debt reinvestment for expiring debentures in 2024 and 2025. So this plan is represented by the blue line as opposed to the red line, which is our current funding. So this doesn't help us avoid the drawdown in reserves in the short term. It doesn't, and it can't, because the costs in 2025 are too high, And there's not enough budget years to build up our funding quick enough without shocking the tax base, right? So if we're committed to doing this project set, we have to do a drawdown to reserves, or we're talking debt, or hopefully we could get a grant, and that would also soften the blow to our reserves. So as I mentioned, this model does not contemplate the receipt of application-based grants. It would be unusual for us to not receive a grant in like a couple-year period. So this is a bit of a conservative estimate as it is. As I mentioned, this does not consider the use of debt. That's the use of debt. We're going to talk a little bit more about debt, but it's really up to council's appetite of what they want to do with debt and whether they want to take it on and what kind of projects they want to take it on for, and future interest rates. So if the recommended plan is approved, we'd see our capital reserves dip to, we'd still have that drawdown. They dip to $4 million by the end of 2027 and then start to rebuild starting in 2028. So this is really just it's a drawdown and rebuild strategy to get us past some difficult budget years. By the end of the 10-year plan, the township would be generating additional $1 million in annual capital funding. This also excludes any increases to the town's annual grant funding through OSIF or Canada Community Benefit. So those normally receive some sort of inflationary adjustment. So again, this is a conservative figure, but I think that's what we should be doing when we're looking 10 years out. So I mentioned debt reinvestment as one of our recommendations. We hadn't talked about debt yet through the budget. So here is our current outstanding debentures. They're all with Infrastructure Ontario for rates below current lending. When you borrow with Infrastructure Ontario, there's no renewal. So you lock in your debenture over the period of the loan. Therefore, the township has no interest rate risk. It has to account for due to the recent rise of interest rates. So that's important to note for our operating budget forecasting. So our recommendation is to repurpose the debentures relating to MCP and South Dorchester Community Hall and a debenture relating to the LED streetlights project to our capital reserve in 2024 and 2025. This adds an additional $117,000 in capital funding without impacting residents at all. Our other debts are for the South Fire Hall and the Port Bruce Pier, which don't expire for another couple decades. So when we talk debt availability, so the province does set the township's debt cap based on 25% of our net revenues. Based on our most recent filings with the province, we've used about 11% of our debt ceiling, and we would be able to borrow another 32 million approximately based on a 30-year debenture with current interest rates, which I've just pulled from Infrastructure Ontario. I should mention that our debt cap is actually based on the magnitude of annual debt payments and not gross debt itself. So if interest rates begin to go down, our debt capacity would increase because the payments would be lower. Okay, so going into the 2023 capital budget, we are recommending a total of 3.893 in capital spending. Of this total, I mentioned nearly 400,000 is recommended to be completed from projects that were carried forward from 2022. So when accounting for this carry forward, our new capital spending is recommended to be 3,580,500, which exceeds our annual capital funding by $407,000 for 2023. So that difference will be drawn from the reserves this year, if approved as presented. I'm just going to provide a quick, I'm not going to go through the entire project set for 2023, but we certainly invite council to ask any questions about any of the projects that are listed. I'm just going to provide some quick highlights. We've got 1,498,000 of roadworks, the majority of which relates to surface treatments. A map is presented on page 104 of the budget. 278,700 in bridges, including 209,500 for the Carter Bridge project, which has received pre-budget approval and has actually gone to tender already. 592,700 for fleet, including a loader replacement for 330,000, 200,000 for drainage works. Specifically, that's the road allowance for our portion of municipal drainage works on Sparta Line. $779,100 for fire services, the majority of which relates to initiating the replacement of a tanker for $700,000. We have various facility related expenditures detailed, which amount to $116,500. $124,800 for improvements proposed under the Parks and Rec Master Plan. $121,500 under administration and governance, including a $50,000 placeholder for strategic planning, as well as $50,000 for server replacements. And our EECC capital request amounting to $358,000, of which the township funds 50% for a net cost of $179,000. This is inclusive of the ice resurfacer, which had a budget of $135,000, but does not include the desiccant unit repairs, which we will need to add at a net cost of the township of $20,000. So as I mentioned, a full set of the township's 2023 recommended capital budgets start on page 71 of the budget book. Staff are available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Leach.
Through you, Madam Mayor. When you refer to the debt reinvestment and the expiration date, is that just that interest rate is expiring?
The debenture itself is expiring. So currently we budget for the annual, we collect property taxes and we apply it against the annual payments for the debenture. That debenture is going to be expired. So we're going to have those payments that are already in our operating budget, and we're going to repurpose them to fund capital. And that'll be at a no cost to the taxpayers because it's already in the budget.
So those will essentially be, those buildings will be paid off.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Big ticket items. Deputy Mayor Widner.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Maybe through you to Matt or Adam. This Vienna line culvert. Is it imminent? Do we have to do this right away, or can we get another year or two out of it, maybe to hope for some grants or some cheaper technology or something like that?
Yes, so through your worship, this project was identified in prior OSIM inspections as needing replacement. It's been a consistent one that's been on the radar through various OSIM inspections. So last year we did have Spreed Associates have a look at alternatives to replacement of that structure, various ways to slip lining it or other methods, what method would be most cost effective. And it was chosen that the full replacement is the most cost effective method, looking at a cast in place structure that's going to have the longest life. So we've undertaken the design for that project, which is 60% done at this time. And exactly what you're saying is our hope that continual OSIM inspections will allow us to push the project out further and not have to undertake it in the planned year. But having a design prepared will allow us to react dynamically to grants, or if OSIM inspections identify that it's a now need, then we have something ready that we can tender immediately. So it's an expensive undertaking that, again, hopefully it doesn't have to happen in that 2025 year. It can keep on getting pushed out until we get a grant for it or something like that, but we need to be dynamic with that response.
Right. So cost effective is not, the most cost effective is not the cheapest. It's just in the long run, it is cheaper. Right. Okay. Councillor Wilson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, are we better off trying to build up some reserves to pay for this in the meantime, as opposed to trying to pay for it all at once? Like the 3% that you want to add, is it better off bumping that than waiting longer term? Or what's I guess what's the pluses and minuses of, inflation is up a lot more than what our proposed tax increase is. And are we better off bumping that up a little more now as opposed to having to charge for it more later?
Director Boylan, did you want to comment? Because I think you're trying with the 3%, you're trying to top up the reserves to sort of flatten out the overall shock, I think, as you said. And I also want to point out that if you look at the actual increase in our budget, I think is close to inflation. So I don't think we're trying to, go against inflation. I think we're fully recognizing inflation, but we've had some growth, which allows us to, the actual tax rate increase is not an inflation. But I think our budget overall increase is kind of keeping pace. But did I buy you enough time?
So I kind of mentioned in the presentation that I don't, like, it's a 2025 project that there's, unless you cancel a bunch of the projects that are currently slated in 2023 and 2024, but we don't have enough time to build up our reserves to fund that project. Like, it's $2.2 million, right? Like, 1% tax increase is 79,000 for us. So we're well off being able to generate our reserves to fund that project. So that's why we're looking at a drawdown or debt, or we're kicking the project down the road. I just don't see any other way to really do it. In terms of, so reserves just don't sit in a bank account. I guess I didn't do this as part of the presentation. When we're talking about inflation and how that affects our capital planning, we take the funding that's slated in our reserves and we invest it, and those investments do typically exceed the rate of inflation. Now, they didn't last year. That's a bit of an exceptional year, but typically our investment strategy takes care of any inflationary impact that would otherwise eat away at the purchasing power of our reserves. And then these budget increases that I've got actually in the budget document are really to build funding capacity. But the actual investment is the investment strategy is supposed to be taking care of the inflationary estimates for the next 10 years. Yeah. I should mention the whole 10-year plan, like all the project costs are adjusted by inflation, which itself is like, we're not sure exactly what's going to happen with inflation. So you kind of have to take the whole 10-year plan with a grain of salt as well.
Yeah, it's based on assumption. So it assumes also no increase in funding, no grants, right? So it's like worst case scenario. Okay. Deputy Mayor Widner.
Okay, we can move on to, we have a loader, 330,000. I guess it needs some work. It's not new anymore. I need some repairs. Now, do we know the rough idea of what the repairs would be?
Yes, through your worship, the current loader requires about $13,000 to $15,000 in repairs. Right now, U joints and a heater element, 2 repairs that, again, if this project was to go ahead for replacement, those repairs should be done pending how long it would take to get the new one in service, which we'd have to do some research into see what the backlog is. If it was looking at a 2 or 3 month turnaround to be able to get a unit, then those repairs likely wouldn't be a good investment to make. But that's something for all of the fleet that's shown in the plan. It's our current plan is age-based, which isn't the best way to go on this. So that's with the terms of reference of the fleet committee that we now have. That's the plan, is that all the fleet's going to be looked at in detail by the team, and the recommendations made to council to make sure that those fleet vehicles are the ones that should be replaced. Age-based isn't really the way to go. A newer vehicle might need to be replaced and keep an old one. The loader would be in that review as well, making sure that we can get the best timeline stipulated on that purchase and sale, and the best way to get through it, whether we make those repairs at this time or not.
Just to follow up, yes, thank you. We probably have to do the repairs anyway if we want to. We probably have to use it this summer, do we?
And that'd be correct. I'm looking to call the fleet committee together in short order within the next month or so, that we'd be looking at that. So within that time, we'll have a better idea on lead times for a new unit. Again, whether those repairs need to happen or not.
Pretty important machine though, and it works really hard. So it's, what year is it? What's that? Yeah. 2008.
So on page 88, it's referenced as a 2008.
8,000 hours. Thank you.
I know I have one comment. I just want to make sure all the microphones are off if you're not speaking, because I'm concerned about the quality for audience. I think you mentioned some furnishings that need to be replaced, and I know you can't see on camera, but we have our staff sitting on plastic chairs because some of our, and so we have a table that's kind of limping a little bit. I would be curious to know if, let's say you're already buying several chairs for the office, if we were to consider also chairs so that we can be properly seated also in council chambers. I don't think it's very extravagant request, but perhaps sometimes there's economies of scale if you're ordering more at once. But I would be curious to see what that would look like if this was added to the budget, because at some point, I mean, this space has to also reflect the township well. Other comments, other pluses or minuses on the capital side? Deputy Mayor Widner?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. You're looking for 3 pickup trucks too. I don't think we've discussed that, or is that further on in the budget, or? Fine now. I know I've talked to you this week, and a couple could maybe be saved. The focus has to go. It's a sad moment. We should have a service, but I understand. But the pickups, you said a 2009 will still be viable? And another 2013, I know.
Yes, through your worship. So we're still looking at replacing purchasing of 3 vehicles this year, 3 pickup trucks. It would just be a matter of which vehicle would we be disposing, not necessarily the one that's in the current plan that's age-based. So we're still looking at purchasing 3. It would just be which ones get moved around in the fleet for their particular use that might be looking at to get longevity out of a older pickup rather than one that is in the plan. That's one that again, that we want the fleet committee to have a look at to make sure that we're purchasing the right vehicle for the right task at this time. So we are still looking at purchasing 3 for the replacement, but it would just be which task it's replacing that we're looking at.
Do you wish for further clarification on that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I know we talked the other day, we thought we could not replace 3. Is that not true?
Sorry, that must be a misunderstanding. Yeah, we were still looking at replacing 3 pickup trucks. It would just be which pickup truck is being replaced. That's what we were looking at.
So there could be a difference in cost and an impact on expenses, even though it's the same number. Okay. And that will be further reviewed by the committee. Okay. Councillor Wilson.
And through you, Madam Mayor, it's more of a comment than question really, but I was shocked at the number of pickups that the township has. I was just like, holy, that's a lot of pickups. And my pickup outside there is a 2008 with 500 and just under 590,000 kilometers on it. So if you look after stuff, it'll last. No comments on how things are being, nothing on that. It's just, I was surprised at how many vehicles are in the fleet.
Councillor Leach.
Through you, Madam Mayor, is that the entire fleet of equipment that listed in the 10-year capital budget that the township has, or are there some that are not slated for replacement that are not on there?
Yes, there's additional fleet that aren't listed here. There's various timelines because we're right now we're based on a dated fleet replacement plan. So there's various timelines that are put on each vehicle. The heavy equipment 12 years, and then larger items 15 years replacement, and then the smaller fleet the 7 years. So it's not all listed within this 10.
Deputy Mayor Widner.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess this will all come to be when we have the equipment committee can look at these things. Maybe, I know we've been buying cheaper pickups with smaller engines and smaller trucks, and we're saving some fuel for sure. Not everybody needs a 3/4 ton. And some of our old trucks are getting rough. I mean, those little Colorados, they've had their days, so. But I think it's a good time for the equipment committee to have a look at these things and just, we'll go over and see what we got. Thank you.
I'm happy to propose a brief recess. We can mull that over a little bit more and come back and see if we have further questions for the capital budget. And also open it up to other questions or comments, additions, pluses, minuses. This is the time to make requests. So 10-minute recess. Let's resume budget deliberations. So we left things, the capital budget, any further comments, requests for items to be reconsidered or adjusted from what we've seen today? Not seeing anything, so I'll open it up to the broader discussion back to the overall budget. And if we look at the entire budget and what we've been presented between last week and this week, are there any further tweaks that you'd like to have looked at? Councillor Glinski.
Madam Mayor, I was just wondering about the HVACs that we have in Fire Hall number 3 for $50,000. How old of a piece of equipment might that be? Is that the original or? And are they really that expensive?
Director Sweetland?
Yes, through your worship, it's all original equipment that it's out of service that we can't get new parts for. That said, we've proposed a facility condition assessment in this year's budget, noting again, there's a lot of these life cycle replacements that are part of our asset management plan that are all simply age-based, where we'd like to have the mechanical components looked at from a condition-based perspective, what parts can be refurbished, what can we get, rather than just full replacement based on age. The numbers that are included in the capital budget are based on market quotes that have been received. So yes, for the replacements that are proposed in here, those are actual prices.
Thank you for that. Other comments? Deputy Mayor Widner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to the treasurer. Did we earmark any money for training? I know we talked about it last meeting, but 4,000 was maybe thrown out there, but have we earmarked anything this term for that?
So the existing budget for council is 4,000. It hasn't been updated, at least in this budget document. So it was the same 4,000 in 2021, same 4,000 in 2022, and currently the draft budget has the same 4,000. So it hasn't changed in a few years.
Just
Follow-up?
another question, if I could, then have we used any in the past few years?
I would have to go back further. You used less in the last couple years, but that there was a pandemic, we all used much less. So it's hard to say. I could go back as far as council wants and pull those numbers. I just don't have them in front of me.
I just don't think it's been real popular, but I'm not opposed to having the training because sometimes you go and you can save that amount of money if you find some new technology or something. So, thank you.
Councillor Glinski.
Madam Mayor, that money that we didn't use for development of council, was that put into reserves or did it just roll back into the budget?
It combines with all the other line surplus deficits to combine for a overall surplus deficit, at which point council directs where that money goes at the end of the year. So I think in last year's budget, I recommended we put that toward the contingency reserve, and then later that year, we just restacked the reserves anyway based on council's policy, and that summer report on reserves I did. But the normal process, and we'll do it for 2023 later this month, actually, I'll bring forward a Q4 report. It will state your surplus and you'll get to choose where it goes. But that surplus is made of all these different lines aggregated together.
So we haven't done that yet for 2022, but yeah, typically based on what we've talked about, our reserves being a little short, it's a good place to reinvest any surpluses, but we'll have that discussion later. So any further comments on development? So I know I've looked at that line in the past, and I don't believe it was ever spent. I think there were a few $100s spent. So no, I participated in workshops, and they were a few $100s, and but I think that was it. But I would agree, it is a good investment, and I think it is an expectation by our constituents that we stay up to date, and that we talk to other municipalities and counterparts and compare. I've had a chance to attend several conferences. There's a budget at the county for that, so been able to use that portion of the budget, but that means, that leaves a bit more room for council to participate. So do we want to see what it looks like for next week if we were to bump it up a little bit? If, let's say, everyone attended, just for a theoretical exercise, at least to see what it looks like, if everybody attended one conference per year, what would that look like? So this is just for the draft budget, like a revised draft that we will look at next week. Does that sound like a fair exercise? And perhaps not counting the deputy mayor and myself, we can access also what is set aside at the county. So it would be for 5 councillors. Deputy Mayor Widner, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just to comment on that, probably each conference would run about $2,500. Time you get your accommodations and your entrance fees and your transportation and everything. So if we would put it up to maybe 5, that'd be enough for a couple, right? So it's not a bad thing. I mean, if anybody that hasn't gone probably should go once just to see what's there. You get to see the cabinet ministers, you can meet the cabinet ministers. There's good trade shows, there's good information, and lots of workshops. So, and you meet other people from other municipalities. I know Central had most everybody there for this last conference. So good to talk to some people sometimes. Thank you.
And it could be every other year as well, because there's a bit of repetition. There's a great opportunity this year. The AMO conference is in London, so we can save tons on accommodation, transportation accommodation. It's in our backyard. So, so then you're just paying registration. So that's a great opportunity. So I think let's have a look to see what it adds up to, and we'll make our final decision next week. Anything else? Councillor Leach.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd like to thank Director Boylan and Director Sweetland for such a nice, clear, concise snapshot of everything. It's a number is just a number, but there's a whole story behind it. So it's nice to hear the stories of each of these numbers and how they reflect and mean to our community.
Thank you for that. I think that is echoed by all of us and constituents as well. So it's nice. So I'll ask staff then, do you feel you have the information you need to do a revised draft? Did you have a chance to calculate grant impact during recess? You did, of course. Did you want to share that this evening, just to give us an idea?
Yeah, sorry,
It's up to you.
I will share that. I was just going to pull it up for council. Okay, so this is our revised grant schedule. So I changed the Malahide Community Policing Committee. The request is 2,000. We're approving 0, which saves $1,500 from the last prior year funding. So all those ones that we had approved last budget meeting amount to a 0.03% increase for the $2,400. And then tonight, We approved the Elmer and East Elgin Agricultural Society for $4,000, which is a $3,000 increase to the budget. And then the balance were approved as requested. So the total increase there was 0.06. So combined, it's a 0.09% increase to our draft budget, including rounding.
So we're satisfied to roll that in the revised draft and see what the total picture looks like. Okay. Great. Director Boylan.
I should mention, I don't know if that, if it's going to be something we talked about tonight, but the Canada Day event is currently not in the 2023 draft budget. So that kind of has the feel of a community grant request, maybe something we can take care of tonight.
And that was, our share is $5,000. So the request is for $5,000. Any thoughts or comments on that? Counselor Wilson.
How much have we given in the past?
Sorry,
It's just that if I'm sort of went, don't want to go from 1,000 to 5,000 with the fair board, so it's only fair that if we find out what that was.
so through you, Mayor, it hasn't been a grant request that's come to council previously. What it has been is grants applied for to the federal government from the town of Elmer on behalf of the EECC for the Canada Day celebrations. This year, Elmer has advised through the staff report that the grant wasn't obtained this year through the federal government. So in the absence of a grant from Celebration Canada, being the federal government, we're needing to fund this ourselves 50-50, Elmer and Malahide.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and may not know the answer to the question, but does the reason we're not getting any grant money happen to be because when we had our first community center complex meeting, there was no plans for Canada Day?
And through you, Madam Mayor, I don't have an answer for that question. It's a town of Elmer administration with regards to the grant applications for Canada Day. So they've advised in their staff report that grants weren't, the funds weren't received. The grant wasn't secured.
That grant has been accessed in the past. As I recall from the budget, I think where we're running into the events were canceled the last couple of years, right? So now it's being rebooted without a grant.
You don't get grants. Through you, Madam Mayor, you don't get grants you don't apply for. You don't receive building permits that you don't apply for. There's a lot of things that you don't get if you don't apply for them.
So as CEO Bedridge indicated, I don't think we have, we know the details of why there isn't grant funding available this year. But it sounds like, I mean, it would be too late to request, so we do have to make a decision. Councillor Wilson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not against giving money to it. I've been at plenty of the Canada Day celebrations at the complex, and it is extremely well attended. And I know there's a lot more, there's tons of people there from Malahide. It's not just an Elmer centric thing, and I'm certainly not against it. I'm just asking about those other numbers. Thank you.
Yeah. And to follow up on Councillor Wilson's comments, that was considered at the EECC board. So as members of that board, that's where that comment could be directed.
I missed the last meeting, so my bad.
Any further comments? So again, we're looking at a revised draft next week, so this was something approved by the board and recommended for Malahide Council consideration. So I would say, let's put it in again to see what it looks like. And once we have, I keep saying, the full picture of all the pluses and minuses we've had to adjust, there's still another opportunity to change our mind, I guess. Fair enough? Okay. So again, looking back at staff, were there any other outstanding items we should be considering? Director Boylan, anything else that where you feel you need directions to prepare your final draft? Or is there?
That wasn't a microphone question. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Boylan, similar to the Canada Day funding, whether the EECC need for an ice resurfacer, whether that could be addressed as well.
Currently in the capital budget, we've absorbed the EECC capital budget into our budget. It does contain a ice resurfacer budget at an amount of $135,000.
Okay, so we'll look at a revised draft and we'll revisit whether, it doesn't sound like we need next Thursday's meeting, but we'll confirm that at the end when we're at adjourn this week. So we had one bookmark for this week in case we needed further delegations or deliberations, but looking around the table, doesn't sound like we need further deliberations.
Question.
Deputy Mayor Widner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through to Adam. Do you know the last price of the tender for the ice resurfacer? It was in the 80s, wasn't it? Yeah, it was a lot less than we'd had budgeted for, but it's not the same machine to have.
Take this information with a grain of salt. I believe the estimate was 110. I don't know that would be that'd have to be a question that goes to the EECC board. They're the ones that are dealing with it. They can give you an answer for sure. But the original budget estimate was 135,000. My understanding is 110 is closer to what they're looking at in terms of what they're getting for pricing.
But you can verify that as part of the revised and get the latest information from our colleagues at Town of Aylmer. Okay, so do you want to receive the presentation? So we'll close the discussion on that and just receive tonight's presentation.
So that the 2023 budget be received as presented.
Mover and seconder, Cerna. Leach, all in favor? Carried. Now, we always leave room for delegation open questions and especially for budget meetings. Just want to confirm we don't have anyone online, Allison? Right, so there are no questions received in the chat and no one in attendance. We did receive correspondence from Mr. Bill McIntyre. To summarize, we'll put the correspondence as part of the minutes. But to summarize, there was first off appreciation for the document and the quality of the document. So appreciation expressed to staff. And if I were to summarize two areas, I think in something we discussed earlier this evening, something about a reasonable tax rate for this year, potentially having a negative impact where we pay a little less this year, but then we'll pay for it dearly the following years. So I think we've addressed that, but I just wanted to say that is a concern out there. So we'll continue to do our best to provide reassurance on that. And there's a comment around special area rates, so community benefits, I think, for the village of Springfield. There was a suggestion that a review of that policy be included in this year's budget deliberations. So I'm going to recommend that we need a broader review and recommend that staff this at some point this year in advance of budget discussions for next year, we look at it comprehensively throughout the township, because we have other villages, we have other hamlets that have grown, and we need to just not do it piecemeal. You all often hear me say that, don't do it piecemeal. Let's just look at the big picture. So I think it is a fair point to be raised, and we'll ask staff to look at that more broadly. So that's all the correspondence that we've received. Other business? Councillor Wilson?
Through you, Madam Mayor, sort of discussing that Springfield has a additional levy. You know, I represent Ward 2. People in Ward 2 aren't necessarily excited about paying for ice removal in Port Bruce that didn't take place this year. I voted to go not with the long arm, but with the drag line, which costs more. I voted for it. Mother Nature made me look like an idiot. So it's, you know, it's everyone knows what they should do with 2020 hindsight. But that being said, we've got a levy for people in Springfield. How about a levy for Port Bruce ratepayers? They, you know, they take up extra budget for that ice contingency plans. And you know, I'm not against trying to recoup some of that we're putting in there.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I think that speaks to that ongoing theme for this year of reset and refresh and revisit. Thank you. Any other business? So we'll officially cancel the meeting that we had scheduled for this Thursday. You want to proceed with confirmatory then?
The bylaw 2318 being a confirmatory bylaw be given first, second, third readings and be properly signed and sealed.
Mover and seconder, Lewis, Wilson, all in favor? Carried. And adjournment.
That the council adjourn at special meeting at 9:09 PM to meet again on March 14th, 2023 at 7:30 PM.
Mover and seconder, Widner, Glinsky, all in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.